Hi there, I'm Dr. Vyvyane Loh. Welcome to our live Q&A. And, I just want to make sure I say hello to everyone. So if you're tuning in, just let me know where you're listening in from in the comments section. And that way I can say hi to you. Because if you don't tell me, I don't know you're there, right? And I really like to know who's out there and listening, and also what questions you may have, anything you want to comment on based on previous episodes, maybe something that I could clarify better for you, and if there are other topics that you'd like me to talk about. And yeah, make sure you put that in the comments. And in the meantime, I also want to let people know that you can check out my website, vyvyanelohmd.com, vyvyanelohmd.com. And there you can sign up for my newsletter, which I put out once a month. Yes, I write the thing myself. And I generally give a heads up as to what episodes are coming up. And sometimes I put some information on a paper that I found interesting, and just a little bit about what's going on, what projects I might be working on. All right. So, yeah, if you're there, say hi. Let me know who you are and where you're listening in from. And in the meantime, I had some questions from people who had listened in to the latest episode, and that was on the liver, basically about fatty liver. And people wanted to know what they could do to, reverse the fibrosis in the liver or reverse fatty liver. And as I said in that episode, this is very doable and has been shown to be quite consistently happening if people were to change their lifestyle habits. So, the number one thing I think that would be really important for reversing fatty liver is to pay attention to your nutrition. And primarily, you want to avoid really too much of the ultra processed foods, especially ultra processed carbohydrates. You want to cut down on your carb intake, especially fructose. And that is something that really is quite damaging to the liver, especially in excess. And a lot of processed foods will have fructose in spades. So that's one thing to avoid for sure. And any small amount of alcohol will be damaging to the liver. Okay, so that's something that you should consider. And I highly advocate not drinking if you have a diagnosis of fatty liver or fibrosis. Okay, now the good news is when you pay attention to your nutrition and also to exercise, then you have a very strong chance of reversing your fatty liver and reversing any fibrosis that you may have. As I said in that episode, cirrhosis is harder, and it's still quite controversial whether you can actually reverse cirrhosis. And I think, again, it depends on the stage of cirrhosis. So early stage might still be reversible. However, when you get to very late stages where there's complete change in the architecture of the liver, then that'll be a lot harder to change. And also, maybe also take a lot longer. So they have noted in some cases that there was resolution of the damage to the liver, but this happened over a much longer time period, over the course of years. So that's, kind of what happens with cirrhosis. But definitely, if you're in the fibrosis stage, there's a lot you can do. So paying attention to nutrition, adding in the exercise, sleep is really important because the liver plays a good role in setting your circadian rhythms, right? And so making sure that you are paying attention to your sleep and getting enough sleep in terms of hours, and good quality sleep is going to be important, and cutting out, toxins like smoking, alcohol, as I mentioned earlier. So those things are very useful in terms of reversing the fatty liver. And I've certainly done that with a large number of my patients. All right. So let's see. Let me check to see if there are any comments or questions at this point. Yeah, I don't see any right now. As I said, if you've just joined us, please let me know where you are listening in from, and let me know what questions you may have. Hey, Mr. Blue, thank you so much. It's so good to see you. How you doing? I hope the weather is better for you. Was raining here a lot, and then now it's cleared up, and we've had a bout of much better weather. And Mr. Blue, I just want to say I will be adding in a skin episode soon. So that's coming up. All right. Anybody else? If you're there, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, again, I have to read the comments in this side. So if you're listening in, you have to type into the comments for me to be able to know you're there. And then, like I said, I can give you a shout out and answer any questions you may have. Yeah, skin episode coming up. What else? Yeah, I had a whole couple of episodes on basically on HDL and HDL in the brain, which is really how most of your cholesterol is transported in the brain is in HDL alone. And that's the actually, it's the only lipoprotein that is in your brain, made and circulating around in your brain. And so I have had a lot of people who have had very high HDLs, and in the beginning, everybody thought that was a good thing, and now we're starting to question, whether that's a great thing or not. Traditionally, the higher the HDL, the more you would consider it healthy, and now not so. In terms of plasma HDL, it's a U-shaped curve. At the low end, at the very high end, actually more adverse events. And then in the middle, that's where you should get it. Oh yeah, Mr. Blue is is already 80 degrees. Yeah, I know. Those come very suddenly. And time to get that vitamin D. Oh, garden is planted. Where are we? May? Yeah, I suppose that's when you should start. But it seems like time goes by so quickly, I can't keep track. I blink and then it's very soon I'll be kind of saying happy Thanksgiving to everyone, right? It goes by so quickly. So I haven't had time to go out for vitamin D, not yet anyway. Maybe in the next few weeks. Let's see. But certainly, back to what I was saying about HDL, you don't want to get it too high either. And then all the HDL, all the lipoproteins in your brain are HDL. And if you have very high HDL, is that a good thing or a bad thing, especially depending on your ApoE status, right? If you're ApoE4, who knows? Because that's going to be carried on the HDL alone. And HDL is not quite what we thought it was. We used to think of it in terms of just density and size. And now we realize the protein content in the HDL is highly significant. And the focus now is on the HDL proteome. So now, there's this list of proteins that they keep adding to that they discover in HDL. So there's this general HDL proteome list, and if you're a lab that has discovered a new protein in HDL or associated with HDL, you can report it to that list. So this means that, the research is still very much at the beginning, and we're just trying to discover what's really important about HDL. Okay, hi. I I'm not sure how to say your name, but you have it as OG, I guess. OG, or maybe Mr. Blue knows you. So thanks for dropping in and saying hi. Where are you listening in from? Mr. Blue's in the Chicago area. I'm in the Boston area. I don't know where you're listening in from. Let us know. And we've had people from different parts of the country, obviously. And again, if you have questions or you want to comment on something, please do so in the comments. Okay. And then uh, what else do I have coming up? So I have been trying to line up some guests for the podcast. It's hard to coordinate. And that's the hard part about trying to get guests, coordinating people's schedules and, making the time, making sure that you're in the same time zone and that people are available when you want to film and that kind of thing. So that's been the challenge, especially trying to coordinate this myself while seeing patients and doing the rest of the things that you need to do as a physician. So, but I really would very much like to start to bring people on and interview some guests, especially about things like uh, immunometabolism, for example. Oh my God, Australia! What time is it there? I'm just thinking we're at 5:30 here. I have no idea what time it is in Australia. Um, but it's amazing. Thank you for joining us. And I wonder if there's anything that you're interested in hearing about in the podcast. If there's an episode I could do that would address an interest of yours, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, Mr. Blue, that is so true. I've been trying to get doctors, yeah, and researchers, and they have different speaking engagements and they have different meetings and so forth, conferences to go to. So scheduling that and making sure you're on everybody's timetable and matching all of that, not so easy. And so that's been the frustration. As I said, I really am interested in looking at immunometabolism and getting some experts on to discuss that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So Mr. Blue is saying that on some podcasts, participants have been trying to schedule time to do an interview together, and sometimes it's taken years. Okay, so thanks for warning me. I don't know if I have that kind of patience. Years. All right. I suppose I have to get a planner that's 5 years long and book people in advance, especially people who are quite well known. Maybe if they're especially if they're well known in their field and they're very much in demand and they're in big conferences year round in different parts of the world, it makes it a lot harder to coordinate. Yeah, and sometimes I wonder if there's anyone else in their lab that I could contact, but I don't know the people in their lab. I just know the big name, right? So it is what it is, and I'll still keep plugging away, right? Like I said, immunometabolism. I do have a guest that I'm gonna eventually bring on once I get her schedule lined up with mine, and that's in OBGYN because I think that's important too. There are aspects of OBGYN that I want to discuss, and maternal fetal medicine that I think is interesting, maternal metabolism that is interesting. And I actually will be doing an upcoming episode also on menopause. So that's something that affects a huge patient uh, group, in my population. And so I think doing an episode on menopause will be interesting. Yes, I have heard of Chris Knobs, the AMD, yeah, macular degeneration guy. That's a great person. I'm gonna have to reach out and see if we can get him on in the next, I don't know, 5 years, right? Because he's quite well known. So it might be 5 years, Mr. Blue. Can't promise. And then there are some special people that I really want to talk to. Some brains I want to pick. I'll tell you now. I'm going to say it. My favorite scientist is Ruslan Mechitov, and he's really in immunology, amazing researcher, and just an amazing brain. I love how he thinks, and he's very much a systems thinker. So I've really been following his work very avidly, and that's someone I want to interview because even though he is in immunology, one thing that I really like about him is how he has such a general overview of health and disease. So he's not just stuck in the immunology world per se. He's interested in questions and in systems thinking. And that to me is really interesting. And I think we need more broad thinkers like that who can, survey the whole sort of medical and basic science field and start to see um, connections between different fields of research and different fields of practice. So he's definitely big on my list. That would be a dream guest to get on. And then there's a couple of other people who are very much involved in adipocyte research. I'm very interested in fat tissue because it actually, that tissue, interestingly, directs a lot of metabolism in concert with the brain, right? There's a huge link and communication with the brain there. And fat tissue is able to obviously signal through hormones. But the thing that has been very compelling to me most lately is that fat is also a very good um, exporter of various substances through what we call extra cellular vesicles, or EVs. And again, these are, I mentioned this in previous episodes, these are little, lipid containing packets. So they're compartments or little endosomes, vesicles, whatever you want to call them. I think the nomenclature is tough in that field. They're generally called extracellular vesicles, and they're made of this lipid membrane that encloses some kind of cargo, whether that cargo is protein, whether that cargo is nucleic acids, right? Genetic material, all of that, right, is exported to different tissues and can communicate with different tissues in the body. And actually, lipoproteins are, you can think of lipoproteins as a subset of extracellular vesicles. I think some researchers see it that way. So I find that field very interesting. Okay, you're interested in the mass in, mass out as a better explanation than calories in, calories out way to explain fat loss or gain. And I'm not sure what you mean by mass in, mass out, but certainly I will say that the calories in, calories out way to explain weight management, I think, is very much lacking. The reason for that is, that we're assuming a closed system, which your body is not. And we're looking at energy in your body in the form of heat, right? So we're looking at thermodynamics and heat as a form of energy only. But how energy is regulated in your body is much more sophisticated than that because we generate, you know, membrane potentials, ion potentials, right? So we generate these gradients that can drive, you know, channels that can drive reactions, for example. And that form of energy, it's hard to capture just in terms of calories. So I just think that the calories in, calories out is outmoded because it's quite restrictive and assumes a closed system as well, and also doesn't take into account different um, different forms of energy and energy management in the body. So I think in that sense, you're right. It's not a great way to explain fat loss or gain. And I'm not clear what the mass in, mass out uh, sort of model is. So maybe if you could explain better, that would help me. But I think you're right in that there's so many better ways to look at energy regulation and management in the body. Also, I'm very interested, as you know, in body composition, and we assume all fat is the same. Of course, it's not. We know there are differences between subcutaneous and visceral fat. We know that there are different types of fat. So you have brown fat and beige fat and pink fat and so forth. The other thing is how much of the fat is fibrose, because fat tissue is comprised of fat cells, but also connective tissue, right, including fibroblasts, immune cells, blood vessels, and nerves. So, what's actually happening in the tissue is really important. And if you have fat tissue that has a lot of fibrosis, that's very different from fat tissue that doesn't have a huge amount of fibrosis. And the other thing is how plastic the fat is. So the assumption generally for most tissue has been in the past that you go from, normal tissue to fibrosed tissue. And once you get fibrosed tissue, you can't reverse it, right? You can't reverse the fibrosis. However, fat is really interesting because fat has this range of expression, and it can go from normal fat tissue to being almost like being a fibroblast and then reverting back to the fat phenotype. So you have this range of expression going from adipocyte to fibroblast in the fat cell. And in that case, then fibrosis is reversible because it's in the fat cell, just one end of the spectrum of expression, right, of what the fat cell really is. So it's very plastic that way. It can go from normal functioning tissue to fibrosis. And, looking at someone and looking at their fat mass, even with DEXA, doesn't tell you the function and the level of fibrosis, for example, the level of damage. So that, to me, I think is interesting. And Mr. Blue is saying that it's a lot of people definitely don't see it as an organ, but it really does a lot, from storing vitamins to sequestering toxins. Absolutely. Sequestering toxins, I'm so glad you pointed that out. Not only that, sequestering viruses, right? And, microorganisms. So now we're learning that fat is very good at sequestering pathogens, for example. And so, after all, it's a store of energy. And if you are a pathogen, a microorganism of any kind, and you get in the host, you are going to want energy. And, the best place to look is to go to the fat cell. So fat is now known as a very important harbor for viruses and other microorganisms. Yeah, Mr. Blue, I was actually going to be, well, somewhere down the line, because I was looking this up. I was planning to do an episode on it, and I forget what it was under, but I had it lined up. So definitely stay tuned, because I will be addressing that and how fat is involved in a lot of infectious diseases. including, when I say fat, I also, so we can think of fat as the tissue, the organ that you're talking about, Mr. Blue, but it's also, as I was talking about earlier, a means of transport in the form of these extracellular vesicles. So, in other words, these are the UPS parcels or packages, and you can put different things in the packages and ship them out to different organs, right? And so the fat tissue is very useful for harboring the toxins, harboring the vitamins, harboring the viruses, but then it can be shipped to other parts of the body, right? Which makes it totally fascinating to me. So you can see why, if there's pathology in the fat tissue, you're going to impact the entire body. And as I said, we look at lipoproteins, they really are just a subset of these extracellular vesicles. In other words, your body is used to, we think of the bloodstream as one way to connect the body and to transport substances from one part of your body to the other, right? So that's through the vasculature, through the blood. But another way is to have these vesicles packaged, right, and shipped out to different areas of the body as well. And that can be through the blood, but who knows if we are also doing it in a paracrine or autocrine manner where we're shipping out things, to neighboring cells in the tissue, right? I think that has kind of ignited a lot of interest and research more recently. So, yeah. And then in terms of fat loss and gain, the other thing is we typically will study fat in fat, right? So if you're looking at a body composition by DEXA, for example, you're looking at fat mass, lean mass, and also you have bone mineral density. Okay, but then uh, really you can accumulate fat in muscle. So intramuscular fat, yeah, is actually um, quite significant in obesity, for example, and in some chronic diseases. And then obviously fat in organ systems. And you don't pick that up in a DEXA. You do if you're doing a CT scan or if you're doing MRI. But those, we don't do those every day. Um, so Mr. Blue is saying, you're wondering why when some people have viral infections, they can have unusual stool in terms of um, shedding of viral fragments in stool. And that might be it, because if they have, when you say unusual stool, I think you mean stool that has a lot of fat content in it. And that may be so. That might be one way that you do kind of dispel of substances in your body, right? The GI tract is interesting that way because how it interacts with the rest of the body. We're starting, as you know, to think about this gut and rest of body axis, right? Gut brain axis, gut liver axis, gut lung, you name it, gut and rest of body axis. This is what I call it. Just name your organ and your gut is connected to it. Yeah, floaters. Yeah, that could be it. The other thing is also that um, a lot of times you could be shipping out things in the bile as well, right? And that is ultimately the end of cholesterol metabolism. So that's one way to ship things out of your body through the bile. And that's part of lipid metabolism because it's part of cholesterol metabolism. So yeah, fat is highly important in that way. In there was a period of time when everyone focused on proteins, and the thought was that really proteins are the beginnings of life. And my thought is, and I think some people are starting to think that way, it's lipids first, right? Not to say that you can only have one and not, the other, but if we didn't have lipids, then we wouldn't be able to form membranes. And if you didn't form membranes, then it was hard to partition, the cell out from the rest of the environment and keep resources within the cell and, prevent the cell from, let's say, having its resources taken away by other substances or organisms, right? So really, you need it first to make a barrier of some kind, and that would be the membrane, which is, of course, a lipid membrane, and that allows for phase separation as well between, more aqueous phase and, the lipids themselves. So I think that we don't think of fat that way, but I do think of fats as the beginnings of life because you did need to first be able to compartmentalize and form a barrier, and then you could have a cell, right? And the other thing was that it provided a source of energy, the membrane itself, but then the lipids themselves could eventually be metabolized for energy. So, used to be that it was just proteins that were important for life, but now I think people are realizing that really right at the beginning, perhaps we needed the lipids first. Okay. Other thoughts or questions? Yeah, we got pretty far. We got into stool and floaters. So, I guess it could go anywhere from here, right? Um, yeah, so my interest is in the fat cell, in adipocytes, fat tissue. Very interesting, and I'd love to bring some experts on who maybe could give us more insight into fat as a tissue. Okay, and we'll see what I can line up. All right, any other specific topics that people want me to share or discuss? The clot thickens. Okay. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Um, You know, Dr. Kendrick is quite brilliant, and he has really spent a lot of time and years thinking about atherosclerosis and how the clot develops and so forth. So, you just gave me an idea. Yeah, that would be a good idea to do an analysis of what he says in his book. I do think that, I have been interested in atherosclerosis for many years. And at first, I had the sense that, okay, I just want to find the one thing or the main thing that causes atherosclerosis. And over time, I've realized that it's not one thing and it's such a multitude of things. So, you can get into an accident, for example, in so many different ways, and you'll end up in the hospital, right? So I think it's kind of the same with atherosclerosis, that there's so many ways in which the disease can develop. And what we know now is about how plastic the cells can be, right? For example, I think when we think about atherosclerosis, we think of different cell types. So we think of, the foam cells coming from the macrophages and the vascular smooth muscle cells. But, it turns out that uh, there's some plasticity there as well because macrophages can actually and do become vascular smooth muscle cells. And so when you look at the pathology, when you look at the histology, under the microscope, and you see a certain cell type, one thing we don't know is the origin, right? You see a smooth muscle cell and you see thickening of the smooth muscle wall, but and we've always assumed that that's just more smooth muscle developing. But now that we know that macrophages can turn into vascular smooth muscle cells, then we realize we don't quite know the origin of what we see there. And that contributes to the pathogenesis of the disease. So I hope I'm making sense here. But I do think Dr. Kendrick is really on the right trail in many ways and has very many interesting concepts that he's put out. And I think you've given me a great idea, and I will plan to do that and make sure I credit you for that idea to do an analysis of of his book. I will say that a lot of the topics that I have brought up, that I have put in the podcast, they seem like they come out of nowhere, but these are things that I'm trying to just build as foundation stones. Because eventually, when we pull together a topic like atherosclerosis, you can see where all these foundation stones come in and how they've laid the base for this disease process, right? So, for example, I talked about the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. And sometimes people listen to that and it's like, la la la, because they've heard it a million times. I will say they haven't heard usually of the tissue renin angiotensin aldosterone system and how it's related to fibrosis, for example, and how it interacts with cholesterol, for example, how it interacts with different immune cells, for example. So these are huge components that are involved in atherosclerosis. And I'm trying to just lay all the foundation bricks right now. And eventually you'll see as I start to pull them together, you're going to see that, wow, okay, you are looking at sort of a 50,000-foot view from above of the terrain, right? And you see how things are linked better. I'm hoping, right, that that will happen. So, um, I wanted to, when I started looking at this, kind of nail it down to one or two things, but then I've realized that it's a whole host of things, right? And in some people, it'll be more one factor that is important and contributes to the disease process, and other people it will be something else. We do know that at heart, at the root is inflammation. And to understand the process of that inflammation is really important. I also just want to give a heads up. I did an episode on lipoproteins, and that was just an introductory episode. But now I will soon be doing an episode on lipoproteins and another aspect of lipoproteins that I think makes them a more sort of suspect in the atherosclerosis hypothesis. Okay, so that episode on lipoproteins, call it part two, um, is something that I'm looking forward to because there's so many things about lipoproteins that have been known, again, in the basic science world for a long time that have not really been discussed in the medical context. And lastly, just about atherosclerosis, I will say that even in the pharma world, they've actually turned to the notion now of inflammation being the root cause of atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease, so much so that the formulation of drugs that they are working on now is really fixated on anti-inflammatory aspects, right? Trying to dial down the inflammation. So they've been looking at ways to dial down interleukin 6, for example, right? High levels of interleukin 6 have been really thought of as causal in atherosclerosis. And they're really starting to look more at the immune response of the blood vessels. And that has kind of shifted the development of drugs. So in the last, I would say, 15 years, in pharma, the focus has actually not been, I know we hear a lot about the statins and lowering cholesterol, that kind of thing. The real focus in the last 15 years in pharma has been actually to dial down inflammation. I suspect we don't hear a lot about it because they haven't actually come up with a medication that they can now sell and plug, right? They've been working on it because they realize that's the root cause. But why plug it? Why put money, educating people about inflammation if we don't have a product yet to sell? But the minute someone comes up with that new drug, right, that's a successful interleukin 6 inhibitor, for example, then all of a sudden we're going to see that shift from cholesterol. I promise you, all of a sudden, it's going to be focused on inflammation. So just wait for that medication to come out, and then that's when we start to talk about inflammation. And what did you say here, Miss? Seed oil consumption. Yes, because I call it one of the razor blades. So in my practice, sugar is a razor blade in your bloodstream, and the seed oils are another type of razor blade. So in my practice, my patients know if I say seed oils, I go, "What are those?" They go, "Razor blades." And I'll say, "Yes, that's absolutely right." So yeah, I think that that's highly inflammatory, and there's a lot of seed oil consumption, and there's also a lot of additives that you don't hear about very much that are really kind of implicated in inflammation. So carnivore seems to be a very low inflammatory diet. Yeah, I mean, obviously, and I know you're thinking carnivore in the form of whole foods and not processed meats, for example. So, I think that obviously, if you have these highly preserved and processed meats, because, and I point that out only because sometimes you get people reading about, oh, carnivore and so forth, and then they think it's just meat in any form, and then they go buy the highly processed and preserved types of meats because they're yummier and they're easy to carry around and prepare. So those things can be very inflammatory. um, you know I think obviously we need to do a lot more research in terms, and real research, not the whole correlation type stuff that who knows what that means, right? So real research on nutrition. But the sad news is nobody's going to fund that at this point unless there's going to be some payoff for them. And so I think when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to health, sadly, most people, I mean, the general population, we're kind of on our own because nobody's interested in really keeping you healthy. um, People should consider how the preservatives work. They prevent microbes and from digesting the food, so they'll prevent the microbes from digesting the food, but they may also, yeah, have other impact in your system. And the other thing is, some preservatives are also, how should we say, metabolites in some of these biochemical pathways, right? And so then you are you are actually changing the flux in these pathways. Okay, and when you change the flux in the pathways, then you're going to have certain, consequences in um, the regulation of energy in your body. Natamycin, I've not heard of that, Mr. Blue. What is natamycin? Is it from nata, from the I think it's a special kind of fermented tofu that's rich in K2. That's nata. So I've not heard of natamycin. Um, I wonder if that's a kind of, oh, really? I don't know what it actually is. I'll have to look that up. And I'm gonna just call you OG because I don't quite know how it's pronounced, but okay, OG says, I've been eating whole food carnivore for 3 years. Lots of amazing health improvements. It's incredible. Yeah, I think whole foods of any kind is going to make huge improvements. And for some people, carnivore seems to be particularly helpful, right? And I've seen people do really well on carnivore, and some people don't do as well. I will say I've generally not seen people do poorly on carnivore. You know what I mean? So, whole food carnivore. So, maybe some people want to add a little bit of vegetables in there, maybe just because they like eating vegetables or they feel more comfortable with the vegetables in terms of some of their bowel movements. But I've really not seen anyone go on carnivore and have adverse effects if they're eating whole food carnivores and doing it in the right way. Mr. Blue is talking about natamycin as a mold inhibitor. That sounds ominous. Yeah, it's a metabolite of Streptomyces bacteria. Mold inhibitor. That sounds very scary. The mold inhibitor. Actually, I know some people who would fit that description. Mold inhibitor, but that's a different story. We'll not go there. All right. Okay. And so, OG, the whole food carnivore that you've been doing, so I presume it's because of some health concerns that you may have had that made you switch to whole food carnivore. I wonder how you heard about it and if that's been hard. Sometimes, it's usually when people switch their diet like that, they feel a lot better, but then it disturbs the people around them more. I found in my patient population, right? In other words, the patient reports great improvement in health. They feel better, they're happier, they're more satisfied, their metabolism is better regulated, they sleep better, they have more energy, and yet everyone around them uh, seems distressed by it, and I don't know, they seem to want to convince the person to switch. So I'm wondering if that's your experience, because that's often been the experience of my patients. They get a lot better, and then their friends and family members are concerned, right? So when they were eating the nachos and the Doritos and the Cheetos, nobody was concerned. But when you go to Whole Foods, whether it's whole food carnivore, just low carb whole food, then everybody's concerned, and it must be so unhealthy for you. So unfortunately, a lot of my patients have to deal with that, and that's just so ironic. So I hope that hasn't been your experience, but I'm glad you were able to find this way of keeping healthy. I, yeah, the social aspect is the hardest part, right? And it's like you're feeling great, but everyone is making it hard for you to continue doing something that keeps you healthy and feeling great. That part is it blows my mind. It's like, really, you rather I be sick and eat the things you think are okay? I've never understood that, but I do find that my patients struggle with that. You're about 18 months, Mr. Blue, on the carnivore. Wow. Okay. Yeah, 3 years is a long time. It takes a lot of commitment, and it really takes a lot of, yeah, everyone is used to it by now. That's true. You have to train people. You have to train the people around you to kind of accept it and realize that this is you and that this is how you're going to be, and it's because of your health, right? And I've always just thought, can't you see that he or she is feeling so much better, that they're so much more energetic now? Why do you want them to go back to what they were doing before? That I never could understand that. But good for you that you could, stay on it for so long. And Mr. Blue, 18 months, that's very long as well. I can't say I'm carnivore because I was vegetarian for many years. I didn't eat meat, and I was mostly doing eggs. I was doing animal protein, so I was mostly doing eggs and dairy in the form of yogurt and cheeses and other dairy products. Um, and then more recently, the last couple of years, I've added some meat back in, but not a whole lot, just because I'm not the kind to cook. It takes a lot more work, and I just, you know, it's just too much work for me. So I'd rather just, grab the boiled egg and be done with it. It's minimal cooking, that kind of stuff, right? So it's kudos to you that you could stay, all of you, for so long on carnivore. Just don't tell people you're fasting, then they really get worried. I've always said it's funny, right? Nobody blinks when you're really, doing unhealthy things and maybe toxic things to your body. Nobody blinks. Nobody is worried, and they don't even notice. But the minute you try doing something healthy, it's now a huge, area of concern, and now people want to intervene, need an intervention because something's going wrong here, right? I just find it very strange that we live in a world where it seems topsy-turvy that way. It seems topsy-turvy in so many ways, but that's one big way. And the hardest part is that, if the medical world generally falls into the category too of being concerned, right? And trying to get you out of a practice that they're not familiar or comfortable with, even though you are much healthier than before, then that makes it extra hard because then who do you turn to? Yeah, that part's really, yeah, frustrating. And, I've to this day, I'm still trying to tell people, please don't drink the fruit juice and get rid of the high fructose corn syrup. And that seems to be something new, and yet their physicians or their healthcare providers are telling them that they need to lose weight, for example, and be at a healthier, let's say, BMI, but there's not a lot of nutritional advice that's solid that's being given out in the medical world as well. Air fryer. Something who was I telling this week? So I have an air fryer. I got an Instapot, right? And every time I got one of these gadgets, I got so excited. This will solve my problem. I will not have to cook. Yay, right? And I well, the Instapot I used a few more times because I used to cook for my dog. She's gone now, but when she was alive, I exclusively cooked all her food. I didn't want her eating any of the junk, right? So the Instapot, last couple of years, that was very handy because it helped me cook the food really quickly. So I used it for her. I don't think I ever cooked myself a meal in the Instapot. The air fryer I did once, and it was for salmon, and it was good. And then I was done because I know they say minimal wash up, but it still felt like a lot to me. And then I discovered an amazing tool, cooking tool, costs $17 or something like that. It's about this size, right? And it's been the miracle of my life. It is an egg boiler. I hate to say this. It's an egg boiler, and it's got this little dish that you can put water in, and then there's a little plate that has these, rings that you can put your eggs in. You put a dome over it, press the button, and then I guess it steams up the whole, gadget, and then steams your eggs. So I got that. I think it was under $20. And I have used it every day. You can steam. I love mushrooms. I steam my mushrooms in there every day. So, uh, so this one $17 gadget is the one cooking tool I can't live without now, and that's my little egg boiler. It looks like a little toy, right? But it fits into my one finger cooking method, which is microwave, waiter, or take out, and now egg boiler, right? I just press the button, it comes on, and then when it's done, it just beeps. So I haven't tried putting any meat in the egg boiler. I don't know if I'll dare to do that. Maybe I'll put little slivers of salmon in there and give it a shot one day, right? Thin slices of salmon. Um, that's a funny question, Mr. Blue. Mr. Blue asked this question, and I appreciate the question really. It says, how hard is it for you to walk around and refrain from trying to help random people you see in public? I've been doing this for so many years, and I'll tell why I really appreciate that question because I don't think people think very much of the viewpoint of doctors and what's going on in their heads, and that's why I really appreciate that question. In the beginning, I just wanted to tell everyone and help everyone. And then I realized that even the people I told, um, some of them, I don't know what it is. I guess we all make choices, but I realize that for some people, they're not willing to make those changes somehow, even though they don't like how they're feeling, they don't like their poor health. And I think too that a lot of people, there's a huge element of food addiction, right? Especially with processed foods. And so then they find it hard to kind of withdraw from those foods. So I have to say, there has been a period in my life where I felt quite disillusioned. And I felt like, oh, people don't care. They don't want to get better. And now I've gotten to the point where I think it's not that they don't want to get better, it's that um, the environment really conspires against them because everywhere you go, everywhere you look, there's food, 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 in magazines, right, on the internet, and your social media everywhere. And so that's, I think, hard for people to kind of remove themselves from the thought of eating. And most times that they're thinking of eating, they're not thinking of eating, their steak or their omelets. They're really thinking of the ultra processed foods, right? And I think that has to do with the huge addiction that people have to those foods. Um, oh, so Mr. Blue is saying, I overhear someone talking about problems and it's difficult not to advise on certain things. I don't want to be that guy. And I imagine for a doctor, it must come up. Yeah, I've said this before, and I think the more I have been working as a doctor, the more I think it's true. My full-time job is telling people things they don't want to hear. It really is my full-time job. Doctors think that, maybe that they help people get, healthy, or they help people with their illnesses, but really doctors, their full-time job is to tell people things they don't want to hear. And then what we have to do is learn to help people get to the point where they can hear it, that they are ready to hear it. And that part's not taught in medical school, unfortunately. Boron supplements stop nocturnal leg cramps. I'd love to know how this works. I hadn't heard of that, but you know, it. I read something about boron recently, so it's clicking on a button in my head. So I'm gonna have to look that up, Mr. OG at Lip. So let me look that up. I didn't know about the nocturnal leg cramps and boron, but there was something that I had read about boron recently, and I'm right now trying to remember what that is. But I'll definitely look that up. And just to let people know, you can continue the conversation with me, please, by going to my website. If you put on the contact page. You can put your comments there, and I generally get back to people. Sometimes it takes me some time um, when I'm busy, but I really do try to get back to people. So remind me about the boron, Mr. OG. Please go to the website and just kind of put that in there in the comment, and I will make sure I look that up. And again, if you have an interest in a certain topic, let me know and I'll try to work that into my schedule. Okay, so we're coming up on the hour, and I really appreciate that you guys joined me today and you brought up so many interesting points for me. And Mr. OG, I'm gonna just have to credit you for some ideas here as well. Mr. Blue, you got your skin one coming. I hope you'll join me again in the next Q&A. Generally have been doing these about once a month. So again, you can sign up to the newsletter, and I'll put the dates out there. And that's also available on the website. All right. So thank you for joining me for all the amazing questions and the comments and the conversation. And let's keep this up. And I'll see you the next time. Bye. Okay.